Hello, my name is Dave Kunst, and I'm the first person verified to have circled the landmass of the Earth on foot, with the exception of the oceans. And I'd like to share with you one of mankind's most incredible adventures. On the night of October 21st, 1972, a shot rang out from right at the gorge area of a country called Afghanistan. With deadly accuracy, a bandit's bullet smashed through my chest. Before that frightful night was over, 2 more shots left my brother John and I dead at my side, ending his search in life. But it all started with a fantastic, incredible idea to walk around the world. Now, I used to live right there in Waseca, Minnesota. That's where I got the idea from my best friend to walk around the world. And of course, I had some ideas of my own. I was thinking of driving from Minnesota down the tip of South America, or driving across Australia. My friend said, "Nah, it's been done before. Why don't you do something nobody's ever done?" I said, "What's that? What hasn't been done?" He said, "Walk around the world." I said, "Don't be silly. How can you walk around the world? There's water." Well, he laughed at me and told me if I tried walking in water, I'd get my shoes wet. But I could walk the land part of the earth in a circle. If I did that, I'd get my name in Guinness Book World Records. Well, today, of course, if you look at the Guinness Book World Records, Ripley's Believe It or Not, the BBC Record Book, the World Book Encyclopedia Yearbook of 76, you'll find my name there as the first person verified to have circled the landmass of the earth on foot. And I mean, what an incredible idea. Right away, I knew I was going to do it. I mean, think of it. Here's a chance to see the whole world, to have an adventure, an experience, an education. Prove that mankind can do anything no matter what, even walk around the world, and all I had to do was start walking. I didn't have to learn how to fly, I didn't have to learn how to sail. With 2 legs, I knew I could walk around the world. And when I told my brother John I was going to the University of Minnesota at that time, first thing he said, "We're going to do it, aren't we?" And I said, "Yes, indeed, we're going to do it, but we have to commit ourselves and set our goal right this moment." Because lots of people get ideas. Some people even come up with great ideas, but most people, they just say, someday, someday, someday. They never do it. That was going to happen to us. We set the date. We're going to walk out of Waseca, Minnesota in 6 months. And ready or not, we're going on a great adventure to walk the world. And we're pretty excited. We started telling people. But you know, most people didn't believe us. They thought we'd quit. They thought our legs would give out. They didn't think we'd make it across the oceans. But then we met a nice lady who was living in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the time, and not only did she like the idea of walking around the world, I think she would have liked to have gone along, but she came up with another great idea. She said, "How are you guys going to carry your equipment?" Well, we hadn't thought about that. I looked at my brother John and I said, "Well, I suppose we're going to have to carry a backpack." The lady said, "That is ridiculous. You guys are going to carry a pack in your back for 4 years? What you need is a mule, a horse, or a donkey. Then you won't just be 2 guys walking down the road. The animal carries all your equipment, and people will see that you're not hitchhiking," which was very important and a great idea. So the city fathers of Waseca, Minnesota gave us our first little pony mule. We had to name the mule contest, and Willie Make It became the name of our first mule. And I say first mule because this is really a true story about 3 brothers. David, that's me, and my brother John, who started with me from Waseca, Minnesota on June 20th, 1970, and my brother Peter, who lived out in California at the time. And of course, we kind of left Peter out of it. John and I, we got together and started to walk, but you'll see that Peter got involved later on. It's also a true story about 4 mules. Mules, of course, are like horses. And our first mule we called Willie Make It, and it was Willie Make It 2, Will Willie Make It 2, and Willie Will Make It. It's also a true story about an Australian school teacher named Jenny, a 200-year-old wooden-wheeled turkey wagon that was used just for carrying our things and also to sleep in, kind of like a home on wheels. We christened it the USA Turk Machine. Now, one other thing, of course, we had to do is get a map to know where we were going to actually walk around the world. We decided we'd start in Minnesota because that's where we live. And the idea here is to circle the entire landmass of the earth on foot, not to skip one single step. Walk up and touch the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean on both sides. So first off, we'd walk to New York City, about 1,320 miles. Then we'd fly across the Atlantic Ocean over here to Europe. Portugal, Europe's most western country. We'd touch the water, and then we'd walk all the way across Europe and Asia and India to the Indian Ocean. 2 years, 8,000 miles of walking. And these are the countries that walked across: Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Turkey. And yes, indeed, we did try to go across Russia. But at that time, and I don't even think today, the Russians will allow 2 Americans to walk border to border across their country. They denied us permission to walk across their country when we were in Ankara, Turkey. Well, then we tried to go across China. But here again, the Chinese would not allow 2 Americans to walk border to border across their country. They denied us permission to go across their country when we were in Islamabad, Pakistan. So instead, we walked across Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and northern India to Calcutta. And it was there in Calcutta, India, we found out that we would not be able to walk a little country below China called Burma. The Burmese will not allow anybody to walk all the way across their country. And we thought it was over. world walk. Because if you can't walk across Russia, China, or Burma, there's the Indian Ocean. And if you're not going to skip anything, well, we thought it was over in Calcutta, India. But it was there in India we met two Australians. They said, you Yanks want to walk around the world? Why not walk across the world's largest island and smallest continent, Australia? About 3,000 miles. It's actually farther than if we walked all the way from Calcutta, India, across China to Shanghai, China in the Pacific. So we flew across the Indian Ocean, and starting at about the same latitude, only in the southern hemisphere, we started in Western Australia and walked 3,000 miles across the outback of Australia to Sydney, the largest city in Australia on the Pacific coast, flew across the Pacific Ocean back to the good old USA, California, Newport Beach, where I touched the water, and then finished walking 2,000 miles back to where I started in Waseca, Minnesota, to walk around the world. Now in all, I walked about 14,452 miles. Wore out 21 pair of shoes. Walked across 13 countries and 4 continents, taking 4 years, 3 months, and 16 days, and walking more than 20 million steps to walk around the world. Now, we had our map. We had our mules. We knew we didn't need very much money because, you see, we're not tourists. We're not going to be driving a car, so we didn't need gas or oil. We didn't have to spend money for hotels. So we knew we could get along with very little. We had about $1,500 to start on, and we thought, well, if need be, we'll work our way around the world. And so on June 20th, 1970, we're ready to walk out of town, and that's exactly what we did. We waved goodbye to our friends in Waseca, Minnesota, and we're on our way walking to New York City. And this is what we looked like when we were crossing the state of Wisconsin. Of course, that's my brother John, who started with me from Waseca, Minnesota. That's me, Dave. There's our little pony mule, Willie Make-It, the first. And you notice Willie had a lot of things on her back? Well, you see, that's the idea, to save money. We were carrying tents and sleeping bags and food and cooking equipment. But you know what happened? Walking all the way from Minnesota to New York City, 1,320 miles, we hardly ever used a tent, very seldom even cooked a meal. Because we found out Americans love an adventure. If they can't go on an adventure, they're willing to help two guys, like those people from Wisconsin. The lady who owned the Bosstown store spotted us walking by. Hey, what are you guys doing with that mule? We stopped and told her the story of our adventure. She invited us into the store to take anything we wanted free of charge. The kids went inside and got us something cold to drink. The farmer there put us up for the night. That young man who read about us in the Wisconsin newspapers parked his car, put on a backpack, and walked with us for 3 days. Of course, then he had to go back to work. John and I, Willie Make-It, we kept right on going, and we made it to Pennsylvania, USA. That's when my brother Pete showed up, over here in the striped shirt. Now, Pete lived out in California. He had a good job. He really didn't want to take off for 4 years of his life to walk around the world, but he didn't want to be left out. So he got on a bus and bussed all the way across the United States, hitchhiked some in fact, to Pennsylvania, caught up with John and I, and walked with us for 3 days. Of course, little did my brother Peter know then that 2 years later, when my brother John was shot and killed by bandits in Afghanistan, my brother Peter would take my brother John's place and help me, Dave, make it the rest of the way around the world. In Pennsylvania, we had a terrific time for 3 days, the three brothers walking together. Then Pete had to head back home to California, and John and I and Willie Make It, we kept right on walking, and we made it all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, New York City, Statue of Liberty. And you notice my brother John, that's me, Dave, we went right down and touched the water. That was very important, because we wanted to say we walked every inch of the land surface of this earth in a continuous connecting circle from Waseca, Minnesota back to Waseca, Minnesota, with the exception of the oceans. And that's why we went down and touched all 3 oceans on both sides. Willie Make It made it to New York City. Of course, we didn't have the money to take Willie across the Atlantic Ocean, so we just sent her back to Minnesota. There she was well taken care of by a farmer who had 22 kids and 2 ponies. John and I got on an airplane, flew across the Atlantic Ocean, arrived in our first foreign country, Portugal. I mean, the Portuguese were absolutely marvelous. First off, they gave us a little donkey and a cart. But the thing is, we didn't want a cart, we didn't want a donkey. I mean, look at my legs, they're longer than the donkey's. By the time we got from Minnesota to New York City, we knew a little pony mule was a little bit too slow for the 2 of us. And so here we knew we were going to have a problem, and certainly we didn't want that cart. But you know, the Portuguese are wonderful people, and we had a language problem. And we were going to sit there and argue with them when they had decided they were going to give to us this donkey and the cart all decorated with our names, filled with wine and cheese and food. And they had the local Portuguese girls dressed in traditional costumes riding donkeys to give us a nice send-off. No way. We put on our typical Portuguese caps and we started walking with that donkey. But you know what? That donkey was so slow, it took us 3 days to walk into the first major city, Lisbon, Portugal, and we should have been there in about 3 or 4 hours. We had to push that donkey cart up every little nook and crook of a hill. So finally arriving in Lisbon, Portugal, Dr. Souza, the tourist minister at the time, he understood. He kind of chuckled a little bit when I told him, please take back this little donkey and cart or we'll never make it around the world. And he did just that. He presented us with a great, big, wonderful, lovable Portuguese army mule. That big, wonderful mule from Portugal we called Willie Make It 2. And Willie Make It 2 was a super mule. She walked with John and I for 2 years, 8,000 miles across Europe and Asia, over high mountain country, across hot desert country. I mean, we probably wouldn't have made it without that wonderful mule from Portugal we called Willie Make It 2. As a matter of fact, that mule was a survivor. Some of the countries I walked across, the people were so poor that when we ran out of food for Willie, we couldn't even buy food for our animal because the people didn't have enough food for their own animals. Willie would eat the bark right off the trees. Definitely a super mule from Portugal. The picture, by the way, was taken by my brother John of Willie and I in Lisbon, Portugal, the capital of that country. And things were different in Portugal. I mean, John and I, we're spoiled Americans. Walking across the USA, 5 changes of wash and wear, no problem. When our clothes got dirty, we'd go to a laundromat. But in Portugal, where most people didn't even have a washing machine, if we wanted clean clothes, we had to do like Portuguese washerwomen. Go down the river, wash our clothes, hang them up in the trees to dry, and it wasn't very much fun for 2 spoiled Americans. But I found out something about Americans when I'm walking around the world. We like to have things, but we can get along without, if need be. In this case, we had to get along without, and we did just fine. But I'll tell you something, when we found the washing machine, we forgot about the river, and we used the washing machine. Of course, when we're walking across Portugal, we did see the world's most unusual sight, anyway, in my opinion, of the world that I saw. We were invited to the Chapel of Death in Évora, Portugal. Down in the basement of the Chapel of Death in Évora, Portugal, we found the walls, the pillars, the floors, and the ceilings plastered with the skulls and bones of dead monks and nuns. And I mean, it was quite an eerie sight. Then we crossed into Spain. And of course, near Badajoz, crossing into Spain, we walked past many little villages like this one. You can see my brother John and Willie make it. Always the tallest building was the church steeple. Always the villages were surrounded by olive trees and cork trees and reddish brown soil. People very friendly, wanting to help us out. Of course, we did have a language problem. And that became very evident when we got closer to Valencia, near the Mediterranean seacoast. We started to see sheep herders and goat herders. I mean, we wanted to communicate. We wanted to talk with people, but definitely language is a major problem. Because you see, John and I, we could only speak and understand English. And of course, in this case, the Spanish sheep herder, you know, he didn't speak English. And we wanted to communicate a little bit, so we found out the camera was a good way. Take a picture. When I got out the camera, I mean, look at this guy. Got a smile on his face, stood up real straight, called his dog over. Loved to have his picture taken. So that was a good way of communicating with people when we're walking around the world. Although I must say that in some countries later on, in the Muslim countries, in some areas, of course, the people are very superstitious, different culture, different religion, believe in the evil eye, and you start pointing that camera, you could be in trouble. So you have to be a little bit careful later on. But here in Portugal and Spain, terrific way of communicating with people. Then we walked into Barcelona, and there the tourist bureau was absolutely marvelous. They put John and I up in a fine hotel, and finally Willie Make It got a fine place to stay. Because up to that time, Willie stayed outside, she'd stayed in chicken coops, she'd stayed in stables. But here in Barcelona, Willie stayed at the Bull Ring in Barcelona, Spain, and she was well taken care of. I checked on her a few times, and she had so many oats. It's a good thing she was a mule, because a horse would have eaten himself to death. But mules are smarter than that. And then we crossed the border into France, near Portugal. And you can see what we would do when people weren't around to help us out, or a tourist bureau didn't decide they were going to put us up in a hotel, or a mayor didn't take care of us. We'd just find a little park like we did here near Portugal, France. We put up our tent, put our gear beside the tent, cover it with a canvas, let Willie have a little grass to eat, and everything was just fine. But I must say, it was much nicer when we did meet wonderful people along the way. And near Siete, France, we met some terrific French people. And that guy was very special, because he not only spoke his language, he also spoke English. He'd read about us in the French newspapers, spotted us walking by. Hey, you Americans walking around the world. Invited us over. We met his wife and his brother, had a typical French breakfast of marmalade, cheese, fruit, French bread, coffee, and the people had horses, so we put Willie Make It out to pasture. We ended up spending 3 days with some terrific people near Siete, France. And then, the highlight of our world walk, we met a princess. John and I and Willie Make It met Princess Grace of Monaco right inside the royal courtyard of the royal palace, and I must say it was quite exciting for 2 Americans to meet Princess Grace of Monaco, a real princess. The funny thing is that although Princess Grace agreed to meet the 2 Americans who were walking around the world, when the arrangements were made, they forgot to inform her that we were naturally going to be bringing along our mule, Willie Make It. So we walked into the royal courtyard of the royal palace of Monaco. Princess Grace was coming down a spiral staircase looking beautiful just like a princess. All of a sudden she spotted our big mule Willie. She stopped on the steps and she smiled a little bit. She said, "I've met lots of people before, but never 2 guys with a mule. Will she kick?" So we got a little bit of fun with Princess Grace of Monaco. And just to show you what a special lady she was, we presented her with a well-used but well-polished lucky mule shoe, we called it. And Princess Grace accepted that, and when I finished walking around the world, she sent me a letter on royal stationery, which I still have, by the way. I treasure it, and congratulated me and mentioned the fact that she still had Willie Make It's lucky mule shoe on her desk as a memento of our visit to Monaco. Definitely a highlight of walking around the world. And then we walked into the country where we had the most fun. As a matter of fact, Italy was that country, and we had so much fun we stopped to have a good laugh. We call it our mule laugh. Even Willie Make It was laughing. And I mean to tell you, that's the kind of country Italy is. You can laugh across that country having great times. The picture is in black and white, of course, because the Italian newspaper took the picture, just like in the case of Princess Grace. The court photographer took the picture. But here's San Remo, Italy, with the Russian Orthodox Church in the background, and John and I and Willie Mae can having a good laugh. Now I have to